Welcome back to another episode of Killer Brews, the show where beer and fear collide. If you're new to the series, basically what I'm attempting to do here is take two things that I'm kind of passionate about, craft beer and the study of serial killers, and put them together into one kind of interesting series. Now, there are a lot of beer programs out there, there are a lot of serial killer programs out there, but I haven't really seen any that combine the two, so that's what I'm going to try to do today. Now, where this show's going to be a little different than some of the others you may have seen if you're new, is I'm not going to jump straight into discussing serial killers. My background was in law enforcement. I went to law school and became a criminal justice professor. So what I'm attempting to do is bring a little bit of an academic spin to this. So the first few episodes is going to be us setting the framework for how we're going to study and analyze these serial killers. And later on down the road, we'll actually look at individual serial killers, discuss their exploits, and analyze them. Now, the method for analysis that I use is one that was put together by a pair of professors named the Holmeses. And basically they set out a framework by which we could look at serial killers, kind of fit them into different categories, and then analyze what it is that they've done. So in the first few episodes, I did a few different things. One episode, we talked about the difference between mass murderers, spree killers, and serial killers. I did an episode where we talked about what makes serial killers kill. So there are lots of different theories posited as to why serial killers do the things they do. Some look to biological influences, sociological influences, psychological influences, and the correct answer is probably a combination of these things that come together in a perfect storm and create serial killers. Last episode, we looked over visionary serial killers, which are those that have a break with social reality, so they suffer from severe mental illness, and they may believe that God or the devil is imploring them to kill. And this week, we're going to talk about mission serial killers. So mission serial killers essentially kill people that they view as undesirable. Who's undesirable varies from killer to killer. Now, it could be based on something that's fairly obvious, like, say, your skin color, religion, race, gender, or it could be something that's maybe a little bit less obvious. So in the example of the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, he killed people that had ties to technology. So initially it was UNA, Unabomber, universities and airlines. He essentially targeted those who he didn't like. He was, if you read the manifesto, he's kind of a modern day Luddite. He's against technological advancement and targets those who he views as responsible for advancements in technology. Again, that one would probably be a little deeper. You probably need a number of strikes before you kind of put it together and figure out what the motivation is there. Others would be more straightforward. So somebody like John Paul Franklin was essentially a white supremacist serial killer, would target minorities or interracial couples. You can kind of see why he's targeting people, where when you're dealing with someone who's a modern day anti-technology crusader, it might be a little harder to figure out on the initial investigation, right? So who's undesirable varies from killer to killer. Now, some killers may have suffered an injustice, and basically what they're doing is now trying to exact their revenge. This injustice could be real or imagined. An example of this would be Beoria Simmons. He was a killer down in Kentucky. His ex-girlfriend was a white woman with red hair and slight build who worked as a prostitute. So basically all the victims that he targets share these physical attributes. Now, they're not necessarily all prostitutes, but they did have the same physical characteristics as the ex-girlfriend. So it's kind of easy to figure out his ideal victim type. Mission serial killers, for the most part, overwhelmingly, are going to have an ideal victim type. Now, it varies based on the criteria. Like I said, it could be race, could be sex, gender, physical attributes, profession, whatever it is, but they're all going to have some sort of ideal victim type. Now, when it goes to motivation, it can be either intrinsic or extrinsic. For these types of killers, it's going to be an intrinsic motivation. So they kill for something deep within inside of their psyche or personality that makes them dislike this group of individuals. They basically want to satiate that desire to kind of kill or eliminate these folks, and that's what they're going for. As far as anticipated gains, what are they getting out of it? Well, some serial killers kill for sexual gratification. Some kill for financial reasons, so they either want to gain life insurance policies, some kind of business interest, maybe property, something like that, while others will kill for psychological reward. So when we're dealing with mission serial killers, we're dealing with someone who's killing to get some kind of psychological reward out of it. Basically, the killer feels that they have to get rid of these undesirables. Not because God or the devil or something's imploring them to do it, but because their own sense of right and wrong demands or commands them to engage in these types of activities. They might also think that society may admire them for what they're doing, and they might get some kind of, I guess, reward in that regard, and that others will view them in a favorable light. All right. Now, before we move on to the next part of the serial killer narrative, let's check out the beer we have today. This beer is Edelstoff. This is a Dortmunder Lager, and this is from the Augustiner Brau. And these guys are out of Munich, Germany. What's kind of interesting, this brewery has been around since 1328, and this is the third ranked Dortmunder Lager on Beer Advocate. So pretty decent level of respect there if it's the third best Dortmunder in the world, and they've been around since 1328. For Americans, this is probably difficult to grasp, right? The oldest brewery we have in continual operation is Yuengling, and it's nowhere near the 1300s. So this here comes in at 5.6% ABV with 17 IBUs. The ratings on Untappd at a 3.62, Beer Advocate a 3.94. So pretty solid reviews as far as the grading goes on this beer. I went to the website to check them out, and it said that this is obviously quite an old brewery that's only more recently started importing beers to other countries. They do have a decent range of offerings as far as their beer goes. Most of them are traditional German-style beers. So they had a Dunkel, they had a Pils, a Weiss beer, they had an Oktoberfest beer, and one called Maximator. So some interesting brews from the Augustiner Brau from Munich. Also, I love the foil on the caps. I think the first time I ever saw these was maybe some Beck's or one of the other German beers years ago. So it's interesting to see the foil on it, right? Even under the foil, kind of get the neat cap, or the crown, as the Europeans would call it. Let's check this beer out. I'm going with the Oktoberfest Finley glass today. Seems fitting for this German beer. Now you can see right away the color is quite light. This is quite clear. You can kind of see right through it, no problem. Light yellow, fair amount of carbonation that's quickly going away. As far as the head, it's about a good finger's width of chunky white head. Kind of looks a little soapy. Let's check out the nose. Light malt, maybe a little bit of citrus there. That's about it. Nice smelling beer. First thing you pick up, it's obviously a lighter beer, a light-bodied beer. Has a nice crispness to it. You can taste it almost right away. I think the hops kind of add to it, give you a little bit of a crisp taste. As far as the beer itself, light malt, maybe a little bit of a honey sweetness, and then a little bit of hoppiness throughout it as well. Again, the hops, the sweetness was all quite subdued. But all in all, this comes together real nicely. If it's a nice warm spring or summer day, you could do a heck of a lot worse than this. This is a really nice beer. So Edelstoff from the Augustiner Brau, you would get a big thumbs up. I would definitely check out another one of these beers. And I'll enjoy it as we get through the rest of this lecture here, I guess, this episode. All right, so we're going to start looking at the homicidal behavior patterns. For mission serial killers, we'll examine victim selection. So one thing to keep in mind, mission serial killers for the most part are not killing for sexual purposes. Now this doesn't mean that there won't be a sexual element to the crime, only that that's not the primary motivation as to why they're engaging in this type of activity. So one example of a mission serial killer who did have sexual elements to the crimes would be Beoria Simmons. This was a serial killer in Kentucky. Like I mentioned before, he tended to target victims that resembled his ex-girlfriend, who was a prostitute, and Beoria did sexually assault his victims. In some kind of bizarre twist, he explained that what he would do is hold the gun to the victim's head and basically give them the option of granting him permission to assault them or not. Those that granted him permission, again, can't obviously give someone permission to do anything while a gun's pointed at your head, but in his warped view, they granted him permission to assault them. He viewed them as prostitutes and killed them. Those that said, no, even with a gun pointed at my head, you're going to have to kill me, he released. So, again, this is a bizarre warped logic, but in his mind, the acquiescence while having a gun pointed at them basically meant that they were engaging in prostitution. Is this the case? Of course not. But this was the perception of Beoria Simmons. Now, when we deal with these types of serial killers, the victims are generally strangers, so they're not really killing familial victims or people that they're relatively close with. That being said, the victims will all share common characteristics, and again, varies based on the killer: race, sex, physical attributes, occupation, whatever it might be. They're going to share that those common traits. So these do definitely have an ideal victim type, and it's subjective based on who they view as undesirable. They do not necessarily fulfill a sexual fantasy, as emission killers don't kill for sexual purposes, although there may be a sexual element, like we just noted with Peoria Simmons. As far as the methods of murder, mission serial killer tends to be act focused. Now, in one of the earlier videos, we talked about the difference between act and process focused killers. Those that are process focused get something out of kind of delaying death. So they may sexually assault, they might torture, they might keep the victim alive for multiple days, sometimes choking them out or bringing them to the point of unconsciousness, reviving them and engaging in torture or sexual assault again. Those that are act focused are primarily concerned with dispatching the victim. They don't really want to torture them. They don't get anything out of the fear or apprehension that the victim feels. They simply want to eliminate this group of people. They want to eliminate the undesirables. So, we kind of see this in the way they carry out their kills in many instances. For the most part, their murders are planned and generally carried out in a utilitarian way. This means you're kind of swift and certain in the way you dispatch the victim. It may mean they employ a gun, because it's obviously one of the very quickest and most certain ways to kill somebody. Although they may choose other methods because guns tend to be loud and noisy and may draw attention. So they may use some kind of other method. Although the key thing is they're generally going to try to do it rather quickly and then move along. The level of organization might depend based on the personality of the mission killer. Some are going to be more organized than others, but there is generally going to be some kind of organization to it. Now keep in mind, this isn't algebra, this isn't chemistry. Not every single serial killer is going to check all the boxes, right? This is kind of a loose framework for a social science approach to analyzing serial killers. The more organized, if they are more organized, you're going to find there's less physical evidence that's going to be left at the crime scene. They're probably going to bring the weapon with them and not try to leave that up to chance. They'll probably take the weapon with them when they leave, obviously, to try to avoid detention. They may take time to dispose of a body, although sometimes they may just basically kill the victim and leave them where they lie. And that's kind of how it goes with the methods of murder. Murder locations, you can be one of two. It's either transient or stable. These tend to be more geographically stable. They like working in the areas that are their comfort zones. And what might be your comfort zone really depends on the individual. So it could be your house, your place of employment, or some other area where you're comfortable. So if I frequent the local state park for hikes and I'm familiar with all the different paths through it and the trails, maybe that's where I choose to go because I feel comfortable operating in that area. So when you hear that they're stable, doesn't necessarily mean that you're at your house or your town. It's some place where you're comfortable operating, and you're probably going to stalk and kill your victims within that area. Now, when we deal with serial killers, the last group we talked about was visionaries. Because of the severe breaks that they tend to have with reality and the psychological issues, you'll tend to find that they don't have stable relationships. They may have a sporadic work history. They might have a sporadic residency history, so they don't always live in one place for an extended period of time. They may be transient, move around a lot, and a lot of that kind of comes with the level of mental illness that those types of killers suffer from. Now, when we're dealing with mission killers, they tend to be long-term residents of certain areas, so they're a bit more stable in that regard. The other thing you'll find is that they tend to be able to hold down jobs, and they might even be white-collar jobs for more extended periods of time. So where the visionary killers are probably sporadic in their behavior while killing and in their life in general, mission killers tend to be more locked in and more stable, right? So they'll have a job that they attend regularly. They may have held the job for years, and it could be professionals or white-collar persons as well. Now, again, doesn't mean always, but in many instances, you may find that to be true. When you deal with the kill and how they dispatch the victims, You might find that they use a dump site or they might not. Really just kind of depends on the killer and what their motivation is and why they're doing the things they do. So don't be surprised if you see them using a certain dump site repeatedly, or conversely, if you see them just leaving the bodies where they lie. So this is just some of a brief overview of some of the commonalities we see between mission serial killers. And there are a number of people that could fall into this category. So for example, like I already mentioned, John Paul Franklin, white supremacist, targeted minorities and interracial couples. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, targets people associated with universities, technology, and advancement in general. Again, if you look at the manifesto, he's essentially a modern day Luddite, and anyone who's in the tech realm could potentially be a victim. Other people that might fall into this group, if we look back historically, you could probably make an argument that Jack the Ripper is a mission serial killer, and his target audience, the ideal victim type, would be prostitutes. Why is he targeting prostitutes? Probably some sort of bad relationship somewhere in his life. Maybe he had a bad run-in with a prostitute. Maybe he had a negative relationship with a mother, a girlfriend, wife, or some other female in the family. And instead of targeting them, he uses these females as a proxy, the prostitutes, and kills them. So, there's probably a number of people that could fit into this category. Now, where it gets hard is trying to figure out what is the real motivation, why a killer is doing what they do. For the most part, it's speculation on our part. We have to guess. Even in instances where serial killers come out and tell you why they did something, you can't always believe them. The reality is serial killers tend to be master manipulators and master. Now, we just got to kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. I mentioned this before. What I'm going to do, the first few videos are going to be basically establishing the foundation upon which we're going to build when we actually discuss individual serial killers. So, first few videos, we talked about the framework. We talked about why do serial killers kill. We went into last video as visionary serial killers. This time it's going to be mission serial killers. The next few videos will cover hedonistic lust, hedonistic thrill, hedonistic comfort killers. Then we'll do power control killers, and I'll probably do a combined video where we talk about female serial killers and team serial killers. What you'll find is most female serial killers kill as part of a team. In most instances, it's going to be them and an intimate partner. In most instances, it's going to be a male. And what's kind of unique is the dynamic. So I'll look a little bit at the power dynamic between the two people in the serial killer pair. And then we'll try to look at if the individual motivations vary with the two killers. So what you might find in some of these instances is the male is in it for sexual gratification, and the female in many instances is there just trying to appease the man. So it's kind of different reasons why they'd engage in this murder, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. After that, I'll move into individual serial killers, and we'll take this framework that we broke down over the first few videos and apply it to the individual killer. Now, I'm going to try to focus on serial killers where there's not tons of information out there. So if you want to talk about Gacy and Bundy and Dahmer, there's probably 700 videos on YouTube. There's mainstream movies that have been made by Hollywood. And to be fair, you probably know about them already. So what I'm going to try to do is focus on some less famous killers. We'll go through their exploits, talk about what they did, and then we'll analyze it using the Holmes framework to try to place them in one of the categories. So we'll look through the things they did and then say, well, they're hedonistic lust, or they're a visionary killer, or they're a mission killer, and here's why. We'll cite examples. And again, that's supposed to be the thing that's a little bit different about this. I'm not simply going to go to Wikipedia and read what they did while throwing up some images. We'll take that part where we talk about their background and history and the crimes committed, but add to it the actual analysis. Why do we think they fall in one of these categories? So thanks for your time. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. Obviously, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, jump in down below. I always enjoy discussing serial killers or beer with people that view the videos. So, hope you all had a wonderful weekend. Until next time, stay safe and cheers.